Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the only show where today we're talking about two articles that Bungie dropped, developer insights on the future of the game, similar to that batch of articles that they dropped a little while ago. These two articles today are Raid and Dungio, and we also have combatant modifiers and more gameplay-related stuff. So we're going to start with the Raid and Dungeon article, and then we'll move to the next one, and we're just going to go through them. I'm going to give some takes, kind of react to it. Let's see what's going on. Right off the rip, I'm just going to tell you, we're getting one raid and one dungeon per year going forward. We'll talk about that in a moment. TLDR, every year will kick off a brand new raid as part of the expansion. The following major update will then expand on the raid, adding new challenge, twists, and rewards. Second expansion delivers the dungeon. Fourth and final major update of the year launches an event that leverages legacy raid and dungeon content alongside the lines of the Pantheon. So, new raids. We're still getting one brand new raid per year. That is not changing. I think Bungie knows that they need to keep raids around in the game. They're amazing experiences, and they need to keep them around, right? So one new raid, that's not changing. What is changing is the reprised raids. It does not seem like we are going to be receiving these reprised raids in the format that we have been receiving them, which is just Bungie taking some old raid content, you know, putting a new coat of paint on it, and then throwing it back into the game. Like they said here, it seems like they're going to be doing some sort of Pantheon-esque thing that maybe uses some pieces of raid content that are no longer in the game. Maybe they bring back, you know, one encounter from Scourge and one encounter from Crown and something from Leviathan, or maybe something from Wrath, like whatever they end up doing. That's how it seems like we're going to be getting these legacy pieces of raid content back into the game, as these events that are going to happen at the end of the year, which is, you know, it is disappointing to know that we're potentially not going to see like 4 of the raids in the game back on a permanent basis. Wrath, Leviathan, Scourge, Crown, like those are all missing. And so it's a little disappointing to, like, I mean, like the vibe is just like they're not coming back. So it'll be still cool to like see them at the end of the year and, you know, have them back for like a little bit. But, you know, it's when we've had, you know, reprised, all eventually coming back to the game. It's a little disappointing there. Anyway, we'll get back to new raids. Raids will continue to offer a complete pool of exclusive weapons, armor, blah, 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 blah. You can keep, like, they're not changing. It doesn't seem like the new raid, they're not changing anything about us getting a new raid. It doesn't seem like anything is being changed. You can get a higher tier loot by taking on additional challenge, which we'll talk about in a sec. So current iteration of Master Raid is literally just, they bump up the level a little bit. There's slightly increased quality loot with the adept weapons, but otherwise people pretty much just run it for the challenges, run it for their one clear, they get their title, and then they basically never run it again. So Bungie's changing up the formula. New raids will support a raid-specific form of challenge customization, which is something that we talked about in that previous video, where players can select modifiers called feats. Feats will expose and enforce rules such as time trials, contest combatants, or other mode modifiers unique to the raid. The more feats active during the run, the better the chance to earn high-tier rewards. So I would want to know, like, what the base tier reward is in a raid. Like, are we starting pretty low? Is it literally just like tier 1 raid loot when you do a raid, and then it scales all the way up to 5? Are we starting like right at 3 or something like that? Because loot is a pretty big thing to drive engagement, and if there's not enough things to drive that engagement, I mean, this is all cool. Like, I like this stuff. Like, I'm trying to, let's put loot on the side for a sec. Let's just look at this in a vacuum. In a vacuum, I like this kind of stuff. The ability to change the difficulty as much as you want to change it. If you want to have all the modifiers on and go get tier 5 loot, great. But I like the idea of being able to customize how difficult things get. This right here, I've still never gotten an answer as to why we still can't have the contest mode version of the raid in the game for people who want to go challenge themselves in that way. But it seems like they're finally being like, okay, you can play it like it was contest mode or something like that. You know, we don't know the exact definition of what this modifier is going to do. But either way, I think this kind of stuff is cool. Am I worried about us kind of falling into the same rut that we do with master raids right now? Kind of. So we need to see, again, now breaking out of the vacuum, we need to see what the loot experience is going to be like in the raid with some of these modifiers active to see how valuable it is to actually do this stuff in the first place. Raid challenge update. In the first major update, the raid will receive a challenge update, adding new rewards, new mechanics, new feats, and maybe even new encounters. This update will kick off with a raid race event and be a venue for experienced raiders to further challenge their skills. New exclusive rewards will be added as well, new weapons, and a catalyst for the raid exotic weapon. So, I mean, it sounds like Bungie's actually maybe finally going to be doing a true hard mode style update where there's beefed up mechanics to certain encounters. They're maybe even adding a new encounter altogether to the raid, which I think has been sorely missed. But at the same time, the way that Bungie tended to do those hard mode mechanics way back when didn't really feel like they ended up impacting the raid as a whole. Like, one example I can give is like a video where I was like, the War Priest challenge is like a joke or whatever. Maybe that was a challenge mode and not necessarily a hard mode, but either way, like the hard mode version of War Priest way back when, you killed the boss so fast that you never even got to really experience those mechanics. So I'm wondering if Bungie is like finally going to be like, okay, maybe we're going to try to do like a true hard mode, heroic mode situation where with this update, there's going to be a different mechanic in all of the fights, or there's going to be a different this, or going to be a different that, or we're adding something new. I think my concern here is feeling like the raid is incomplete until this update, right? If people get the feeling that Bungie made a raid and then they just like sliced out like a quarter of it to put into this major update, that's not going to feel good, right? The raid needs to feel like 100%. Like you got to have like a whole thing, and then you're just like sticking on something onto the side of it for this major update, right? It can't feel incomplete, and then there's like, oh, look at this slot where this piece perfectly fits in that we haven't received yet. It just needs to feel complete. It needs to feel like we got the whole experience, and this other thing that's coming along truly feels added on and not like, did I just get a sub? It needs to feel like a true add-on and not just like you sliced off a piece. If executed well, I think this is pretty neat. If executed poorly, people will let you know. People are going to let you know on that one. New dungeons. So, unfortunately, it seems like we're only getting one dungeon per year going forward, at least for the next little while. We're really feeling the effects of the layoffs at Bungie now, that we're only getting one dungeon, right? We all know what a dungeon is, 3-man activity. So Behemoth, the second expansion, that's when you're going to get the dungeon. So it's going to be raid update, dungeon, and then Pantheon / raid event, thing at the end of the year. But, I mean, there's a little bit of good news. Because the dungeon will be launching as a part of codename Behemoth expansion, there will no longer be a separate dungeon key. The reward for new dungeons will be expanded to include full weapon and armor sets on par with raids. Right now, dungeons get an armor set and 4 weapons. So, like, not as many weapons as raids, so it seems like they're trying to make it equal with raids. So, I mean, hooray for this. It's just part of the expansion now. But yeah, obviously disappointing that we're only getting 1 dungeon instead of 2. It is what it is, right? Until Bungie can kind of recover and maybe get more people back on the team. Evidently, it is not feasible for them to be able to create a new raid and the raid update and a dungeon and another dungeon after that. So that's kind of is what it is kind of situation. I mean, that's the layoffs for you, and not really too much else to say about that. New rad events Into the Light introduced Pantheon. Fourth major update, we're planning for another event that introduces novelty and allows our team to experiment with the legacy, raid, and dungeon offerings to create surprising aspirational challenges. I think it'd be cool if they could like remodel some dungeon fights into like raid encounters. I think that'd be kind of neat if they wanted to do that for the event. But they're still in the very, very early design stage. So like, obviously they don't have a ton of information, but they just know like, hey, okay, we know that you really liked Pantheon, so we want to do more of that. And I'm good with that because Pantheon was pretty enjoyable. The replayability of it was, you know, not super high, but as like a one time a year style event, I think it's amazing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they kind of cook up with this. I'm looking forward to seeing some legacy pieces of content come back, maybe refreshed, maybe new mechanics, something like that. Dungeon offerings. Maybe they do like a dungeon Pantheon or something like that, or they update some dungeon encounters to be raid encounters, right? That would be cool as well. So yeah, mostly this article kind of reads as like, hey, don't worry, raids and dungeons, they're still alive. Like they're not going anywhere, but we just can't make as much of it, you know, with all the layoffs and stuff. So okay, we lost a dungeon, we lost a reprised raid. But we're gaining this new event at the end of the year. We're gaining hopefully something pretty novel with the challenge update, or the raid challenge update. There's also one more thing down here: raids and dungeons in the core game. Dungeon content is going to be going into the portal, which again is something we talk. I'll link the video at the end, or it's in the description, as part of Pinnacle Ops. Raid content is not going to be a part of any of these portal categories, but it seems like they are going to be looking at ways to potentially introduce it. I think that's okay. Dungeons like being a part of Pinnacle Ops, I think that's fine. Dungeon encounters are manageable without too much communication. But raids, that's a little bit tougher. All right. Yeah, this article is essentially like, don't worry, like we're still making a raid, we're still making a dungeon. That's not going anywhere. So I do appreciate that they're trying to do something about kind of the boringness of master raids, because like once you do them, it's just they're done. So I'm hoping this challenge customization combined with this higher tiered rewards is actually rewarding enough that I want to go back into the raid at these, you know, all these rules and modifiers active, all that kind of stuff. So let's go over to the enemies that might be in these raids and dungeons with the combatant modifiers and more. So I'll give the TLDR and then I'll give a quick take. We're investing more than ever in our activity modifier system. Activities will be updated with a library of modifiers that can change how you approach combat on every playthrough. Combatants will gain varied powers and buffs in order to create new gameplay threats and encourage changes in player strategy. This is, I feel like, the main part of the article here. So they say the problem, and it is a problem up until a point. The problem, playing the same PvE activity repeatedly can feel like a chore, particularly when chasing a reward or following a narrative. Running through the latest exotic missions second, third, fourth time doesn't feel fun enough to justify the time spent. You eventually know where enemies spawns, where to fight them, and how to win with any challenge. Component of Destiny 2 that we greatly want to improve. So, like, yes, eventually you know how to do all these things. I think getting there, like starting down here and then making your way up and like, oh, I'm learning all the spawns and like I'm learning how to like, you know, almost speed run this thing and just I'm absolutely crushing it. And then you like finally have the maximum amount of knowledge that you need to absolutely annihilate a piece of content. And then you do it like 2 or 3 times. Just like, yeah, this is awesome. We're just crushing it. And then you're like, okay, I get it. Yep. The novelty is gone. I remember I posted a TikTok back when I was actually trying to make TikTok content again. I remember getting a question in one of the videos that I posted that was just like, how are you literally just stomping through this GM right now with like no effort at all? And spoilers, it's like 95% knowing where the enemies spawn in, because if you know where the enemies spawn in and you know when they're going to spawn in and you know how many enemies are going to spawn and you know what champions are going to spawn them with them, like that reduces probably about 90% of the difficulty of the game, right? When you know what's going to happen in front of you, there's not any unpredictability, right? It becomes very predictable and you're just kind of going through the motions, right? The solution Improve the experience of replaying activity content by adding variety and unpredictability to each playthrough. I mean, we sort of had this a little while ago where strikes could be like the Taken variant, or they could be the Vex variant, or they could be the Fallen variant, right? And eventually you do learn the spawns of all of those different variants if you play the game enough, right? Like, I'm not saying you can ever truly be 100% unpredictable unless the spawns were completely random, which for this game, I don't really know if that works. Maybe as a modifier, if you hit like the completely random enemy spawns modifier, then maybe, sure, you can have some unpredictability there. I just don't know if Bungie is able to leverage that or even create such a system, because maybe it could be just like a limitation of their technology. I don't know. First class modifier system. Destiny 2 has added modifiers to activities since the launch of the first Nightfall. We're investing more in our modifier systems to improve the fun and challenge in activities. We're creating combatant-focused modifiers that change the way players approach combat on every playthrough. Banes, enemy modifiers, combat modifiers, designing modifiers so that they can combine to create a wide variety of experiences. Reduce barriers to entry and time to fun by reducing the number of build crafting necessary modifiers and replacing them with new combat modifiers. Okay, Banes, which are combatant affix modifiers. You might have heard of this through World of Warcraft. You might have heard of this through Diablo. I don't know if Borderlands does it. Did they add that maybe? Maybe like Risk of Rain does it. I don't know. That sounds plausible for Risk of Rain, right? So these are special abilities that certain enemies get that do certain things. So two of the Banes that we're going to be getting in episode 2, apparently, are Meteors and Shock. And to sum it up real quick, Meteors is essentially an enemy that rains down those solar fireballs on you, kind of like the boss from Proving Grounds, which proved to be very, very menacing. And then we have Shock, which is where an enemy will continuously build up a charge that will discharge on a single target within line of sight. And if you kill this enemy while it has shock on it, it's going to spread shock to other enemies nearby that will continue to just kind of zap you. So it sounds like the idea is to isolate this enemy or kill everything else besides this enemy and then save it for last so it doesn't spread shock to, like, 14 different enemies or whatever. Then we have some sneak previews of other in development Banes, so they are subject to change. This first one is Berserk. So if you, it's kind of like the Acolyte, right? So the Acolytes in King's Fall, where if you kill them and there's other Acolytes nearby, the other Acolytes get super pissed off and it's like start laser beaming you. That's what I assume this is basically going to be, right? Okay. I was waiting for like some kind of like pulse wave to come out and like nothing happened. So I was like, did they upload the wrong clip or something? So you can see like the captain's kind of purple, and then there was like a small little squiggle that came out and like hit some of these enemies over here. So now that they are now they're berserked. So maybe not as flashy as the whole Acolyte in King's Fall situation, but I get it. Yeah, it's still in progress. Okay, maybe the animations are not done. Punchable combatants are immune to all range damage and damage from status effects until they're hit with a melee attack. So you just have to go up and make sure you break that little shield on them. On a captain in a GM, that's going to be really annoying. Punch him. There you go. And then we have Nuclear. Once a unit with a Nuclear Bane reaches low health, it begins an arming sequence. You need to kill it before it finishes, otherwise a big fire shockwave comes out. By the way, there's no sound on any of these. Well, they even have their own little animation. That's neat. Okay. So, enemy modifiers. Enemy modifiers I don't feel like are anything like super brand new. It just seems like Bungie's going to be introducing more of them, or maybe more weird ones or zany ones. Like, oh, some enemies may have copied the tricks about booby trapping their drops from a famous Scorn Baron under a certain new enemy modifier coming in Revenant. So it just sounds like they're coming up with like weirder modifiers for the enemies that you need to look out for. Hopefully ones that, people will actually maybe enjoy fighting against, because I know how certain people feel about certain modifiers in the game, where it's like, if they don't like it at all, they basically bully Bungie into getting rid of it. So hopefully we don't have too much of that. Hopefully there's designed some fun stuff that people actually want to interact with. Combat modifiers aren't just about changing enemies. They can affect players too. So they are also looking to create modifiers for us to be able to interact with, maybe just beyond something like Surge, which is just a very boring blanket, like, yeah, here's 25% more damage. Go nuts, guys. Which essentially just tells people like, hey, use solar weapons or use a solar build or use solar abilities or something like that. What about champions? Will they be using Banes? No. Still exists in our new future for modifiers. They won't be hosting any Banes. All right. Can Banes stack on an enemy? In Revenant, only one Bane can be present on an enemy at a time. In Revenant, which gives me a little bit of hope that you might see a meteoric, berserking shock, fallen captain sometime in the future. Maybe. Are you replacing all the old modifiers with these new ones? No. They're trying to balance them out so that the new modifiers are neat, but we still keep around some of the old modifiers. Fine. So I think all this is like pretty novel. I think my big concern would just be, how unpredictable, how much variety are we really adding to every playthrough, right? Because sure, if you introduce these modifiers the first time through, that introduces some variety, some unpredictability, right? Like anytime there's a new GM that comes around, a new battleground gets turned into a GM, I think it's pretty neat because it's like, oh, it's kind of like a new piece of content, right? You don't know where the champions are going to spawn in. You don't know if the enemies are spawn differently or anything like that. So if we have these affixes on these enemies, but they always spawn on the same enemies every single time, well, then all we're doing is just adding another like cycle of spawn knowledge into my brain. That's like, okay, the shot guy spawns over there, and then the meteor guy spawns over there, and then don't forget about the nuclear guy that spawns over there. So I want to see these kind of like ping pong around a bit more, not that I'm expecting them to be truly random. Again, like, I don't know if they could do truly random as much as they reasonably could, right? Like, how big of a deal is it if you could truly have a Dreg randomly, like any random Dreg in the strike could have the meteor thing, right? Oh, it's instead of this door, it spawns out of this door, and the next time it's this door, and the next time it's over here. Like, to me, that doesn't feel that brutal to try to make happen. So I think that's my thing, is like how unpredictable and how variety are these things really going to be? Because again, the first few times through, it's neat, it's novel, you're learning, you're figuring out the best way to approach some of these challenges. But then if it's not changing, then it's just kind of like, okay, I get it. Nothing's really changing anymore. So that's what I kind of want to see from this, is make sure it's as unpredictable and variety as possible. Or maybe I can control how unpredictable it can be, right? Because we kind of have that with the challenge cards. Maybe let me choose. But like so far, I'm interested. A lot of modern games, Diablo, World of Warcraft, they've been using these kinds of things for I don't know how long now. And there's always been an interest, and I think this is a pretty natural next step for the game. I'm wondering if this is maybe like too little too late. Like, should this have come along much earlier? Maybe it would have been nice. Better late than never, I suppose. But I am interested to see if they are able to really hit these marks on each play. I'm not really expecting each playthrough, but so yeah, mostly on both articles, I'm saying, lukewarm. This again, article just kind of felt like, hey, raids and dungeons are not going away, but we just can't make as much because of the layoffs, or maybe just however they're formatting whatever they're going to be doing in the future. And then here we kind of knew about some of this stuff already from the previous articles, but it's cool to see like some actual examples in action with some clips. And I'm interested to see, what other Banes come along, if they can start stacking, like how far can they take this system in the game? And then when we break out of the vacuum, can they make sure that the incentives to actually participate with these things is high enough that people are going to want to do it over and over and over again? I'm done. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you all very much for watching. If you want to check out the video from the previous articles, it's, I don't know, it's over there, over there somewhere, and I put it in the description. Check it out. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.